Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing a thriller book recommendations video. This is going to be round number 14 of thriller recommendation videos that I've done on my channel. I will have every previous time that I've done this linked down below, but this has been kind of a staple on my channel for so many years, ever since I started my channel. But if you were wondering, it's been such a long time since the last time I was able to make a thriller recommendations video. The last one that I did was in June 2024. It's been like almost like a year and a half. And I think the reason for that is because I've become a lot more picky with thrillers throughout the years. Because it's a genre that I've been reading for such a long time, I think it starts to feel like a genre where I'm like, yeah, I really feel like I've seen it all and that nothing surprises me anymore. So because of that, I feel like a lot of the thrillers that I'm reading just are not impressing me anymore, and it's taking me a lot longer to put together these recommendation lists, because even though thrillers are a genre that I still read a lot, it's harder for me to find ones that I really love and can really recommend. And so on this list, I have about like 12 or 13 thrillers that I do highly recommend to you, and I think they are worth your time. Even if you are an avid thriller reader, I do think these are some of my top favorites that I've read in the last year and a half. We're gonna be starting with the ones that I recommend the most. So coming in as like my most recommended thriller, like if you're gonna take one book recommendation from this video, please let it be this one. That is Julie Chan is Dead. I know this is maybe like a controversial one because apparently this book has some pretty low average ratings on Goodreads, but I absolutely loved this. Like, this is still my favorite thriller that I've read in the year of 2025. In this story, we're following this character named Julie who is working as a cashier at a supermarket, and she has this twin sister named Chloe who is like a really famous influencer that's like living an incredible life in New York City. They kind of got separated when they were younger, like when they were 4 years old, their parents died. They haven't really grown up together because she was adopted into like a really rich family and Julie was not. And so now Julie takes this trip out to New York to go and visit her sister Chloe, and when she gets there, her sister Chloe is dead. And when the police get there, they kind of assume that Julie is Chloe and that Julie's the one that's dead on the floor, and she just kind of like rolls with it and decides to take over her sister's life. It was so unhinged, it was so ridiculous, but in a way that like really worked for me. I think if you're reading a thriller because you really just want to be entertained and you want to follow a character who's like not necessarily the most likable person, but just a very entertaining character to follow, and it's kind of like hard to predict where the story's going. The way that I so desperately wanted to finish this entire thing in one afternoon because I could not put it down. That's the feeling that I had while reading this. I also do think there are some elements of this book that lean a little bit more horror as opposed to just thriller. And if like me, that's something that you really enjoy in thrillers, then I definitely recommend checking this one out. I guess this one is not going to be one that works for everybody, but the way that I love this book so much and I already want to reread it and I just think about it all the time. Another thriller that really surprised me this year is this book called Party of Liars. This is one that I went into with very low expectations because, to be honest, I'm not a really big fan of this cover. I think it looks very basic and just kind of generic. And I also thought the premise of this, I was like, I don't know, because we're following this young girl's 16th birthday party. It's taking place in Texas, and you kind of follow from like 3 or 4 different perspectives that are all people that are friends with the 16-year-old girl, or like the mother of the 16-year-old girl, or like the maid that is like in the house with them. You're following from a few different perspectives, and it's all taking place on the night of the 16th party. Then what was really cool about this is that there's been some rumors about this house that's in Texas, and like people are saying that it's haunted by this mother who like lost her baby in this house. So there is a little bit of like a spooky kind of atmosphere in this book that also really pulled me in. I actually loved the fact that we were following a few different point of views in this book, and I think it made the pacing feel like it was really fast and the chapters were short, and it was just so engaging. Like, this was definitely the kind of thriller where like I wanted to stay in bed reading this all afternoon. Like, I really struggled to put it down. But I also think, oh my god, this book was so messy and so dramatic, and like all of the characters are very unlikable. But if you enjoy those things like I typically do, I do think you would like this one a lot. It's very entertaining, that's for sure. I also think if you enjoyed the book The Hunting Wives by May Cobb, I think this is definitely going to be something that you'll enjoy. All right, the next book that I wanted to recommend to you is the book called Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. And if you were wondering, yes, I do own a copy of this book, but I'm actually lending it to my mom's friend Diana, who's also a big thriller reader. Sally Hepworth has kind of been a bit of a hit or miss author for me in the past, but this one is definitely without a doubt my favorite that I've read from her so far. I also want to compare this book to like Strange Sally Diamond. Like, I think if you were a fan of that book, then I also think that you would like Darling Girls. But something that I really loved about Darling Girls especially is that we're following a group of sisters, and I just in general, like, I really love stories that revolve around sisters, and I especially felt connected to the characters in this story. I feel like this is like the opposite of the last 2 books that I just talked about, where like you really do care about the characters in this book, and the characters are actually kind of like what makes the story for me. But you're following these 3 sisters, Jessica, Nora, and Alicia, and they basically had to grow up with this woman that was their foster mother named Miss Fairchild. And this story's kind of told like in the present day when they're adults, and then we do get flashback chapters to when the girls were being raised by this woman. And the story kind of goes back and forth between the two different timelines, but in the present day chapters, it's about how they're going to be going back to the childhood home where they were raised because they found a body at the place where they were raised, and they have some questions about like what was actually going on in their childhood. And I just loved the storytelling in this book. I thought it was so well done. I loved the way that this author was able to like intertwine those chapters from the past. I just thought it was really engaging. But then also the ending of this book, oh my god, there were like a few different twists that made me like want to scream out loud. There were things that I definitely did not see coming. I just think, in my opinion, that this is this author's best book. Like, I don't know if she's gonna top this one for me because of how much I loved it. Another thriller that I would definitely recommend checking out is Look in the Mirror by Catherine Steadman. This is another author where like she has been pretty hit or miss for me in the past, but this one really surprised me with how entertaining this book was, especially because I feel like the premise for this one kind of sounds a little bit basic, or it sounds like any other thriller that you might pick up. We're following this young girl named Nina, and it says that her father dies and he leaves her the dream vacation home in a tropical paradise. But things don't go exactly as they were expecting it to in this book, and this book just goes in a direction that I was like, wait, what? And I think that's what made this book such a standout for me, you know, because as somebody who reads a lot of thrillers, like I've read so many books with that exact premise, but this one was so unique and so interesting, and there were actually scenes that were so creepy that like I got goosebumps. There was some really creepy shit in here that just really worked for me. Another thriller that I read this year that I thought was so much fun is Cross My Heart by Megan Collins. This is another book that I went into with very low expectations because I've actually not enjoyed anything that I've read from Megan Collins so far. I think I've read, or at least tried to read, like maybe 3 of her books before this one, and none of them really interested me that much. But there was something about this one, dude, this was so much fun. I especially think if you're a Taylor Swift fan, there's gonna be extra things about this that you'll love, like that's all I'll say. I mean, come on, the dedication in this book literally says, for everyone who relates to the prophecy by Taylor Swift, and for every woman who's been called crazy by someone they love. So in this story, we're following this character named Rosie, and right at the start of this book, she has a life-saving heart transplant surgery, and she starts to get obsessed with the idea of like who gave her this heart, and she has a very strong suspicion that the donor of this heart was this woman named Daphne, who was the wife of this really famous author in their town. And so she starts to get really obsessed with this author and with the idea of like being with him, because she's convinced that she's supposed to be with him now that she has the heart of his dead wife. And Rosie has got to be one of the most entertaining characters I've read about in such a long time. Like, she was so much fun to follow in this book because she's so unhinged and she's so ridiculous, and yet I couldn't pull my eyes away from the page. Like, it was just so entertaining to read this. But I also think this is another one of those scenarios where like the book's premise does sound a little bit like any other book that I've read before. Like, it's not a new concept for me to read about somebody who gets obsessed with another person. There were things that happened later on in the story that I really did not see coming at all. I feel like this author just completely pulled the rug out from under me, but like in the best way. And there were so many shocking moments where I was like, wait a second, like I think rereading this book would actually be so beneficial, because then I think I'd pick up on things that I didn't notice before. Oh my god, this book had no right being this good. I think this book would definitely take the cake for like the thriller that I tore through the fastest this year. Like, I could not put this down. Another thriller that I loved and I really struggled to put this book down is Count My Lies. This is another one that I literally tore through this entire thing in like one afternoon because I could not put this book down. I thought the writing was so addicting. And in this story, we're following this character named Sloane, and all we know about her is that she is a pathological liar. She just lies all the time. And we see so many moments from her childhood where she was like lying as a kid. And at first when I was reading this, like, I'm not gonna lie, in the first like 50 to 100 pages, I was like, oh god, like here we go. Because I feel like that's another thing that's like so common in thrillers. You know, like I always hear these thrillers pitched as like, she's a liar, she's an unreliable narrator. And I'm like, okay, I've seen that before, done that before, boring. But there was something about this book in particular that really hooked me. Like, I don't know if it was the writing or if it was the character specifically, but I got so invested in this. And something that I love is that this one's taking place in New York. And then she ends up meeting this couple in New York named Jay and Violet, and they both have this daughter, and she starts to lie to them and say that she's like this nurse and she's overqualified, and they end up hiring her as a nanny, and she just kind of like worms her way into their lives in the most interesting way. And I know what you're thinking, that you've probably read a lot of thrillers that have this trope of like somebody that's untrustworthy becoming a nanny to children and like all of the chaos that ensues, but I still think this book was so entertaining. It was so much fun, and it went in a direction that I wasn't expecting. Like, I think that there were things about this book that were so shocking by the end. So I would recommend this one if you want something that you can like tear through in one afternoon. And also, something cool to know is that this book actually currently has an adaptation coming. I think it's going to be a TV series, or maybe it's going to be a movie, but it's going to star Shailene Woodley as well as Lindsay Lohan, which I think is going to be so fun. Another thriller that I read this year that I absolutely loved was Too Old for This by Samantha Downing. Samantha Downing is another author that has been very hit or miss for me recently. Like, I actually gave one of her more recent books 1 star, and I haven't really loved anything from this author author ever since reading My Lovely Wife, which is definitely like one of my top favorites from her. But this book was so unique and so cool because we're following this character named Lottie Jones, and she is a retired serial killer. I can't remember specifically if it said how old she is, but I believe she's in her like 70s or maybe her 80s, and she believes that her killing days are behind her until one day there's this investigative journalist named Plum who like shows up on her doorstep, and she asks her all these different questions about something that happened to her back in the day, and Lottie starts to think like, oh fuck, like they're onto me, they know that I'm a killer, and so she has to come out of her retirement with killing and start to kill again. I think this thriller was so much fun. Like Lottie was such an entertaining character to follow. I think if you liked the show Dexter, or if you loved reading the book series You by Caroline Kepnes about like Joe Goldberg, I do think that you would like Lottie as a character, like this narration style as well, because there was something so hilarious about following from her perspective, and I loved that because she was like this elderly woman that people just like really underestimated her, and she kind of like used that to her advantage because people would never suspect her of doing these awful crimes because she just comes across as this like innocent old lady, and she's much stronger than she looks. And I think something that made this thriller so unique is that there's no plot twist in the sense that like there's no reveal of like who the killer is or anything like that, you know, because like you're following from the perspective of the killer the entire book. But I still think this book was so impressive because it kept me entertained the entire time. And this book was just like a non-stop thrill ride of trying to see like what is she gonna do next and how is she gonna get herself out of this one. It was so entertaining, and I also think if you liked the book The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier, I think this is one that you would like as well. Another thriller that I would really recommend is The Ghostwriter by Julie Clark. This one was actually a BookTube book club pick recently for the month of August, and I'm so glad that I ended up loving this one as much as I did. This is one that I really enjoy a lot because I'm the kind of person who loves reading books that follow writers, and something that's really great about this book is that we're following a few different characters who are writers. So we're following this character named Olivia, and her job is that she's actually a ghostwriter, and she gets this opportunity to be a ghostwriter for a book that she's not sure if she wants to do because it's actually going to be for her father, Vincent Taylor. And Vincent Taylor is actually known as like a very successful author himself, and she's kind of trying to keep it private from the world that she is the daughter of Vincent Taylor because her father got accused of killing both of his siblings back in the 1970s. There was this night in their home in June 1975 where both of his siblings were brutally killed, and because he was the only survivor, people just assumed that he was the one to do it. And now the story's taking place decades later when Vincent Taylor is like an old man, and he potentially doesn't have very much longer to live, and so he's finally ready to like share the true story about what happened. And so he ends up hiring Olivia, who is actually his daughter, to ghostwrite the book. I was actually so fascinated by the sibling dynamics between Vincent and then his brother Danny and his sister Poppy. I just thought they had such interesting sibling dynamics, and I love that this book was written in the present day. Like I love that you're following Olivia and like her story as his daughter as she's trying to like figure out if she can trust anything that her dad is saying. But then I also love that we do get some flashback chapters that are told from the perspective of like the different siblings, and you kind of get the bigger picture of like what was really going on. Oh, this book was just so interesting. I just really enjoyed all of these characters, and I feel like because I cared so much about these siblings, it really elevated my experience while reading this book. But I also think there were moments at the end of this book that really shocked me and like threw me off, and I personally didn't see it coming. So I really had a good time with this one. This is the first Julie Clark book that I've really enjoyed. I will have the live show link down below if you want to hear even more of our spoilery thoughts talking about this book, but this was a good time. Another book I read recently that kind of surprised me was Joyland by Stephen King. And this book actually is more of like a crime, thriller, mystery type of story as opposed to a horror story, so I thought I would include it on this list. And I think this is actually the perfect book to recommend if you're looking for something that has like this late summer, coming of age type of feel to the writing. We're following this young college student named Devin, and he gets this job working at this place called Joyland for the summer. And Joyland is like this amusement park, but also like there's this story about this girl who had died. Like she got brutally murdered at this amusement park, and there's stories about how like she now haunts the place where she was murdered. But this story actually reads a lot more like a mystery thriller as opposed to a horror, because so much of the story is like trying to figure out the truth about what really happened to this girl, and if there is like a serial killer on the loose that's going around killing other women in a similar way. So it definitely reads more like crime fiction and like thriller type of mystery, and I loved the writing in this book. Oh my god. If you're kind of like unsure about Stephen King, or like maybe you want to get into into his stuff, but you don't know where to start, I do think this would be a good one to get started with him, because I think, in my opinion, this has got to be one of the best written books from Stephen King. Like, I just loved the writing in this. There was just this nostalgic feel to the writing where I just instantly felt drawn into the story and I instantly connected with all the characters. I mean, I do love the fact that this story is taking place in the 1970s, so maybe that's part of the reason why it feels so nostalgic. But there's just so many great quotes like this talking about life, when he says, when you're 21, life is a roadmap. It's only when you get to be 25 or so that you begin to suspect that you've been looking at the map upside down, and not until you're 40 are you entirely sure, and by the time you're 60, take it from me, you're fucking lost. I love the way that this book is written, like, from the perspective of a college student, but it's also written as a reflection of that summer of his life, so the character himself is actually like already in his 60s by the time he's telling the story to you. So I just love that style of writing, because I love when a character is like looking back on their youth and talking about how they would have done things differently. It's actually ironic because I do think like the mystery and thriller elements of this story were the parts that I was the least interested in, but like the writing itself was just so gorgeous, and so I have to put this one on this list because I really do recommend this as like one of my new favorite Stephen King books. Another book that really surprised me that I read recently is this one called The Traitors by C.A. Lynch. This is a thriller that I went into with some pretty low expectations because, again, I feel like this is a premise that I've heard a million times, where we have these 6 people who they get this invitation to go to this place called Beechwood Castle, and it says that this castle is the location of some of the most horrific murders in modern history. But what was really fun about this book for me is that we're following these 6 people who get invited to this castle, but what they don't know is that one of them is an imposter, and they're not supposed to be there. It says one of them is an imposter, all of them are traitors, which of them will survive the night? And so they're trying to figure out like which one among them could be the imposter, and like we don't know as the reader which one is the imposter either. And I do like that we actually get the perspective of all 6 characters that we're following. Like, I thought it would be kind of confusing, but it was actually really easy to keep track of like who's who. I think something that I did really enjoy about this book is that the chapters are so short, and this book is just so easy to fly through. I did end up only giving this one 3.5 stars, and the only reason why I didn't rate it any higher is because I do think the ending was like a little bit predictable, or like I just wanted a little bit more to be happening at the very end. And so that's why I didn't end up rating this one higher than that. But I still think that this was a very solid thriller and something that's very fun and engaging and like perfect to read at this time of year. And then I also have Don't Open Your Eyes by Liv Constantine. This is another thriller that really ended up surprising me, because in this story we're following this woman named Annabelle. And the thing about Annabelle is that she's having all of these nightmares and these visions about things that are going to be happening to her family. And then the visions start coming true, like things that she's seeing in her dreams start to actually happen to them in real life. Annabelle also has this young daughter named Scarlet who's like a teenager, and in this story we not only get Annabelle's perspective, but we also do get Scarlet's perspective as well. And like Scarlet's sections would like stress me out because her sections involved a lot of like her talking to this man online that she assumes that the guy is like her age, and it's just a lot of shady things like that where I'm like, oh god. It was just very intense to read those chapters, but I really loved that we were following from multiple different perspectives in this book. And I think towards the end of this story there were a few things that I was like, whoa, like I didn't see that coming. I mean, I will admit I wish the whole like dream thing ended up playing a bigger part in the story, because I do think it's a really interesting setup, and then like that aspect of the story just like never really went anywhere interesting for me. But this book does have a lot of things in the plot that I was like, whoa, like okay, I didn't see it going in that direction, and that's what really hooked me into this story and why I ended up liking it so much. And then also there's The Man Made of Smoke by Alex North. We're following this guy named Dan who's going to be going back to the small town where he grew up because his father has recently passed away, and he hasn't been back to this town in such a long time because of the crime that he witnessed when he was a young kid. It said he narrowly escaped an encounter with a notorious serial killer as a child, and now he's kind of spent his life profiling other criminals and seeking justice for victims. And so now when his dad dies under kind of suspicious circumstances, it kind of brings him back to this small town to try and figure out what was actually going on. This is another thriller where like I only ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, but it is something that I would still recommend. The reason why I rated this one a little bit lower is because the ending of this book just wasn't very satisfying for me. Like I do think the story really starts to like fizzle out in the last 100 pages, but I still think this would be something that I would want to recommend because I think this book had really great atmosphere. Most of the story takes place on this island, and so the island small town atmosphere was really good. And I also think because there's this creepy like serial killer kind of storyline, it's definitely the kind of story that like makes you want to like look over your shoulder while you're reading it because you feel like somebody's watching you, you know, or like it definitely has that kind of atmosphere, which is something that I always seek out in thrillers. All right, and the final book recommendation that I have for you is this one called You Are Fatally Invited. This is another one that kind of sounds like it has like a similar premise to a lot of other thrillers, but what's really fun and unique about this one is that it involves this thriller writer's retreat. And I love that we're following a bunch of thriller authors specifically. And this writer's retreat is going to be hosted on this private island. And in my opinion, I think this one had really great island stormy vibes. It also had really short chapters and a lot of really interesting characters. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm the kind of person that loves reading books about writers. And I think if you're somebody who enjoys the kind of setup where like people are getting picked off one by one, kind of like Agatha Christie vibes or like Knives Out or even like Clue, then I do think this would be one that you'd probably enjoy. This is another one that I ended up giving around like 3.5 stars. And the only reason I rated this one a little bit lower is because while there were some twists at the ending that I thought were really surprising and that I didn't see coming, some parts of the ending to me, it did get a little bit convoluted and it got a little bit like hard to follow at times what I was reading. But I think for the most part, this book has so many layers. It has really interesting characters and it was so atmospheric. Like I love books like this that take place during like a storm on an island. I just had a lot of fun with the atmosphere in this book and I do think this is one still worth checking out. All right, so those are all of the thriller recommendations that I have for you today. You'll have to let me know if you've read any of these thriller books, then what are your thoughts on them? And again, if you would like to see even more thriller book recommendations, I've done a video like this 13 times in the past, so I will have all of those linked down below. I'm so glad to be coming at you with another thriller recommendation video because it has been such a long time and I have been struggling with a lot of the thrillers that I've been reading in the last like year and a half, but I'm so glad to give you a list of some of the ones that I've enjoyed the most. And I hope if you do take any recommendations from this video that you do find some that you enjoy as well. But thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!